All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are venturing into our last little section of Unit 3. We're going to start talking about active transport, the type of transport through the cell membrane that requires energy because we go from the low concentration to the high concentration, which is against the natural flow of things. So, in active transport, like I said, materials must sometimes move against their concentration gradient. So it must often move things from an area of low to high concentration. And we see this in the image to the left. Here's the cell membrane, here's our protein, our transport protein. We have low concentration of molecules, in particular these square molecules outside the cell. We want to get them into the cell where there's a high concentration. This is called active transport, and energy is needed. That's what this little kind of explosion here is to represent. We have ATP, the energy used to power this flow against the concentration gradient. So just to recap, if small molecules and ions need to be moved across the membrane against the concentration gradient, it will require the use of protein pumps. Okay. Protein pumps will be required and are embedded in the membrane for this purpose. And this here is our protein pump right here. So low to high, active transport, energy needed, protein pump used for these molecules to go in that direction. Another type of active transport we see right here is endocytosis, which the amoeba sisters talked about. The cell membrane kind of forms these almost like arm-looking structures that we call pseudopods. You don't need to know that term off the top of your head or anything like that, but that is the term for this. They're almost like little arms, and they reach out and they grab molecules, substances, food, if you will, and they take it into the cell. Now, this is endocytosis, which is the process that we see depicted here on the right. These pseudopods, these fake arms, pull materials into the cell, and it's the cell membrane. Obviously, this is the cell membrane morphing to kind of fit around whatever this stuff is here, these molecules. And ultimately, inside, once this stuff is taken in, you see it breaks off the cell membrane and it forms a little vacuole here. Forms a little vacuole. And then a lysosome will fuse with this vacuole, and this food, these molecules, will be digested. So that's the cell membrane. This is some food in the form of molecules, and when it gets taken in all the way, it forms a vacuole. This requires a lot of energy. This is definitely a form of active transport. So endocytosis is a form of active transport. And the two types of endocytosis are phago and pinocytosis.
Good morning, Gettysburg.
Oh, Mr. Lusk on the announcements.
Happy Friday. Please rise for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Sorry about that interruption, folks. Now, phagocytosis is cell eating, right? Molecules, food molecules. Pinocytosis, which we see here, is really just called cell drinking.
Thanks for joining me in pledge, and have a fantastic day. Go Warriors.
And you don't necessarily need to know the difference between phagocytosis and pinocytosis. You just need to know that they are both forms of endocytosis, the cell taking things in, and it requires energy, so it's active transport. Exocytosis is also a form of active transport, but it's the exact opposite of endo. It's where the cell excretes things, and we see that in this cartoon illustration here. We see this vacuole going the opposite direction of endocytosis, and instead of breaking off the membrane, it's going to go fuse with the membrane and release whatever these products here are out into the extracellular space. And we see this in a real electron micrograph image on the right. So exocytosis is just the release of large materials from the cell, and we should remember this from our Amoeba Sisters video. Okay, now this is the final stretch of Unit 3. We're going to talk about bioenergetics. So as of right now, we get to this point, we are on the 3.3 Quizlet. This is all about ATP, mitochondria, chloroplasts, and plant cells. How is energy made for the cell to do all this stuff we've talked about in Unit 3? Well, we know that energy is required by living organisms. And we need a constant supply of it, whether it's sun for plants or food for you and I. Heterotrophs, you and I, we are consumers. We need to take in food from our environment. We need to eat things in the environment. We cannot make our own food. This is obviously a recap. I know you guys know this stuff. So examples, all animals and fungi. Autotrophs, which are plants, in particular green plants, autotrophs are producers. Autotrophs can make their own food. And some examples include all green plants, some protists, some bacteria even, some single-celled organisms can make their own food because they can photosynthesize, believe it or not. All right, so these are the energy requirements of all living things, right? There are autotrophs, which make their own food, heterotrophs, which need to consume food to make energy, but all of this consumption or making of food is in an effort to produce energy for the cells. And just briefly, we'll go over the plant cell here. It has a lot of the same parts that an animal cell has, so I'm only going to point out the differences because I think we know the parts of an animal cell pretty well. We know the Golgi. This organelle here, central vacuole, which is located right here, it's huge in the plant cell, and it's just filled with water, really. This is why plants need so much water. This is a reason plants can survive without water, because they store so much of it in this mega-sized central vacuole, which you can see is bigger than the nucleus. Cytoplasm, we know it. Chloroplasts. Chloroplasts, number 4, this structure right here that almost looks like mitochondria, but isn't exactly a mitochondria. Chloroplasts are involved in energy production for the cell, and there's a very, very intimate relationship between chloroplasts and mitochondria in the energy production for a plant cell that we're going to talk about. Ribosomes, protein factories, we know it. Endoplasmic reticulum, also a protein factory, also a lipid factory, we know all about it. Nucleus, know about it, genetic material. Mitochondria, know about it, ATP, cell respiration. Cell membrane, of course all cells have a membrane, we just spent the past week talking about them. And the cell wall, finally our last difference between the animal and plant cell. Cell wall on plant cells, number 10, is made of carbohydrates, rigid sugars, and it's a tough, rigid outer layer that keeps the organism, the large plant as a whole, strong and stable. All right, catch you in the next one, folks.